Julian the Genius, the story of the life of Father Julian Tennyson Woods, written by Sister Marea Ross, RSJ, and illustrated by Stephen Todd. Julian the baby. It was raining in Suffolk, England on the 15th of November in 1832 when Julian was welcomed by his loving family into this world. As they gathered to see the new baby, they all agreed, "What a beautiful baby boy." Little did they know that this little child would be blessed with amazing gifts and talents that he would later share with the people of Australia. Julian the child. Julian grew up in a noisy, happy family with 6 brothers and 1 sister. They loved him dearly. The times he enjoyed best were when he went walking with his dad in the countryside around his home. Often, when his brothers and sisters were at play, he would be seen with his magnifying glass watching a trail of ants carrying crumbs back to their nests. He knew that this was a sign of big rains coming. Julian spent many hours watching the aphids on his mother's roses. It gave him much pleasure to see the orange and black ladybugs arrive. They played their part in protecting the tender rosebuds. He was fascinated to see there was an interesting harmony in the patterns of nature. He knew that God the Creator was busy at work in his garden. His dad taught him how to record his findings in a scientific manner and how he could research further information from the books in the family library. Julian was never happier than when he was studying interesting plants and insects in his garden. Julian the geologist. Julian also had an interest in rocks. He loved to collect them and to study their makeup. He knew the difference between sandstone, granite, basalt, mica, and lots more. He carefully recorded and classified each specimen. He learned to read the history of the land from the way the layers of sediment were arranged. Who would have guessed that Julian would become a respected and often consulted scientist in the future? All this began in his own backyard. Julian the student. It was clear to see that Julian was a clever child. He loved to read. His head was always in a book, even when his sister and brothers were making a racket around him. His reading led him to a love of poetry and classical literature. His family often invited a great variety of interesting people to share a meal. Julian enjoyed these nights and would join in the conversation, eager to share his opinion on topics that stimulated his mind. He also took part in the musical entertainment that followed by playing the harmonium, which is a type of piano. By this time, Julian had grown into a fine-looking young man with a sharp mind. When he was 14, Julian's first job was an apprentice with the Times newspaper in London, where his father was employed. This experience would prove valuable in the future when he would write scientific papers and articles for journals. These are still available for us to read today. Julian, the man of God. In Julian's life, he felt a deeper calling to serve God by becoming a priest. Unfortunately, his health did not permit him to complete his studies with the Passionist priests, so he went to France and tried again with the Marist fathers. Again, his health failed him, so he left and returned home to London. It was while he was in France at Le Puy that he met a group of sisters who worked with people who were poor. He was very impressed with their lifestyle and would remember them again when eventually he came to Australia. In 1855, Julian travelled to Tasmania in Australia at the invitation of Bishop Robert Wilson to be a lay chaplain to the convicts. After some time, he moved to Adelaide to be with his brother James, and here Julian worked as a reporter on the Adelaide Times. Julian was encouraged by Bishop Murphy of Adelaide to resume his studies for the priesthood at the Jesuit community at Seven Hill. In 1857, at the age of 23, he was ordained a priest for the Diocese of Adelaide. Finally, he had reached his goal of following God's call. For the next 10 years, he would serve the people of God in South Australia. Julian, the parish priest. It would be hard to imagine how Julian, now called Father Woods, felt when he realised his parish of Penola in southwest South Australia was spread over a vast area of 57,000 square kilometres. This required days of travel by horseback between settlements. Undaunted, Father Woods set out to meet up with his parishioners who would gather from all of their properties at one central homestead. He would baptise some, he would officiate at weddings, he would instruct the children and the adults in readiness to receive the sacraments. He would gather all the people to share the celebration of Mass, and afterwards there would be refreshments and time to catch up on all the news of the district. The settlers loved to see him coming across the dusty plain. The children were often the first to catch sight of the lone figure on his faithful horse. They would shout to all around, "Father Woods is coming!" and would run out to meet him. This would be the signal to send out the word to the neighbours to join the host family that Sunday. The country people welcomed him with a hot cup of tea and home-cooked scones. At many gatherings, Father Woods would play his fiddle to provide the music for the dancing and fun. Julian, the social reformer. Throughout his life, Father Woods was inspired to make things better, especially in the young colony. In his visits to the settlements, he noticed the difficult condition that caused people much hardship. In his encounters, he found that they had very few resources, especially in time of sickness. He was always being called on to pray with the sick and the dying. Fires often wiped out whole settlements. Father Woods was ready to help out, battling the flames with wet hessian bags with the men of the community. He worked alongside these tough men, trying to save homesteads and animals. In flood times, he was often the only outsider who got through with mail and supplies. Father Woods was respected and loved by everybody. He was genuinely interested in the settlers' welfare and worked with them to improve their conditions. Father Woods would have been regarded as a good bloke, someone they could trust. Julian, the visionary. It often took many months before Father Woods would meet up with the settlers because his parish was so widespread. After these long trips, Father Woods returned to his own home in Penola. It was the central town where there was a church, and on Sundays the people would gather for Mass. One Sunday, Father Woods noticed a young lady listening intently to his sermons and praying with deep reverence. He asked around and found that her name was Mary McKillop. She was working at her uncle's property as a governess for her young cousins. Apparently she was a very good teacher and the children loved their lessons. Father Woods had a plan in mind and he wanted to know if Mary shared his vision. Australia was such a big, open young country. In his meeting with the settlers, Father Woods came to respect them as hard-working, good people who struggled with the conditions of the climate and their isolation from the town community. What disturbed him most was the children were growing up with little or no education, especially about their faith. Something had to be done. Julian, the co-founder with Mary McKillop. Father Woods realised if the children were ever to improve their situation, they needed to have at least a basic education. They needed to be able to read, write, know their numbers, and know about their faith. It disappointed him to see the children deprived of such important knowledge. He valued the opportunity given to him in his education and the enjoyment he gained from reading by the campfire on his lonely travels between settlements. Father Woods discussed his dream of a new religious community with Mary. He learned that Mary had a desire to become a religious sister, and they did indeed share a vision for the children of Australia. Together they knew it would require a response unique for the Australian conditions. And so began a work of God that would blossom into the founding of the first free Catholic school in Penola in 1866. It was open to all ages and was called St. Joseph's School. Father Woods believed that all children had a right to learn about God as their loving Father. Julian the Dreamer. Mary MacKillop was really impressed by the young priest, and she looked forward to their chats after Sunday Mass. She realised that her efforts to educate her young cousins could be better used to benefit the children who couldn't afford a governess. Her little cousins had done well and were now ready for a higher level of education found in the larger towns. Her own family, who had been depending on her wages to live, were also in a better position as her brothers were able to find work. After much prayer and discussion with her family, Mary decided to take up the challenge. Mary set up the first school in a stable. The building needed work, and with the help of her brother's carpentry skills, the school was ready before the students arrived on the first day. Julian, the champion of education. Father Woods and Mary welcomed the first students, who ranged in age from 6-year-olds to gangly 16-year-old boys, all keen to learn their 4 R's: reading, writing, arithmetic, and religion. Religious lessons and prayer were to be an important part of their life. Parents were appreciative of this new endeavour. They realised that Mary couldn't live on fresh air, so they sent along vegetables, fruit, and meals to help her survive. Mary was always grateful and shared whatever she could with the poor families around. God blessed this work, which thrived and became well known throughout the district. Father Woods was a frequent visitor and loved to quiz the students on their lessons. Something wonderful had begun. Mary too had given her whole heart to spreading the love of God to everyone she met. Under Father Woods and Mary's guidance, this vision for the children of Australia attracted many young, generous women to the task. This, in turn, led to the foundation of a new group of religious women known as the Sisters of St. Joseph of the Sacred Heart. Julian, the leader in education. Father Woods' work in education was recognised by many. It seemed to be an excellent way to reach the children who were without a basic education. Father Woods was appointed by the Bishop of Adelaide to take charge of Catholic education throughout the diocese. Because of his amazing knowledge of the life of the settlers in the early days of the colony and the needs of the children, he was well suited for the role. It was a huge task which took up most of his time and energy. Mary and Father Woods communicated by letter and encouraged each other with their work for God. Requests for new schools like the little one at Penola came rolling in. In a very short time, 26 new schools were opened by the sisters. Such was his awareness of the needs of the community, Father Woods went on to found a shelter for men. In Queensland, Father Woods founded another religious congregation known as the Sisters of Perpetual Adoration. These sisters spent much of their time in prayer. Julian, the realist. Unfortunately, because of the difficulties in the Adelaide diocese, the bishop decided to ask Father Woods to move on. For several years, he visited many parishes in New South Wales and Tasmania, giving missions and retreats and helping out when needed. He continued observing nature, collecting specimens, and writing about the natural world. During this time, Mary MacKillop's work was extended to Adelaide, and schools were popping up all over the countryside. Requests were made from bishops throughout the country to invite Mary to send sisters to teach the children. Schools were also established in Queensland in 1869. In 1872, the first school in New South Wales was established at Perthville near Bathurst. 4 sisters lived for a time in the sacristy and taught by day in the front of the church. The bishop was so pleased with this school at Perthville that many others were set up in the district. A new separate group called the Diocesan Sisters of St. Joseph was formed. Father Woods was a regular visitor to the sisters at Perthville, giving encouragement and support in their isolation. God blessed the work of all the sisters so that it flourished in many areas of Australia and also spread to New Zealand. Julian, the eco-hero. The bishop's decision for Father Woods to leave the Diocese of Adelaide and the Diocese of Bathurst proved to be a blessing in disguise. It opened up new opportunities for him to use the gifts he found in childhood, in his love of plants, rocks and insects. He had more time to research and record the amazing uniqueness of Australia's natural resources. His knowledge was so valuable, he wrote books and articles for journals and presented his findings to learned institutions and gatherings. He was also asked to investigate the mineral resources in Queensland. He travelled to Japan, Siam, Thailand, the islands of Indonesia, and the Malay Islands in order to research the uniqueness and value of the natural resources in these areas. For his research, he was awarded the distinguished Clark Medal in 1888. He became so famous that the Tennyson Woods Mountain in Queensland was named after him. In reality, Father Woods was way before his time. He appreciated God's presence in all creation and our interconnectedness with all creatures big and small. He often said, "Every rock, every leaf, every insect has something beautiful, nay, wonderful, to tell of the glory of God," in 1888. Julian the genius. Father Woods was indeed a genius, and he used all his gifts for God and the people of Australia. His health, which was never very strong, failed him when he was only 56, and he died in Sydney on the 7th of October in 1889. Father Julian Tennyson Woods was buried in Waverley Cemetery at Bronte, Sydney. Even after his death, Father Woods went on doing good. The money in his will was used to set up a maternity hospital. It was called St. Margaret's Hospital and provided a great help to the community. Australia has a great debt of gratitude to pay to Father Woods the genius. Every little child who can read and write and do numbers should say thanks to him and to all who work in education today for being a champion for them. Father Julian Tennyson Woods was a compassionate man who had a great care for the Indigenous people. He was a civic-minded person with a deep respect for others. Among all these gifts and talents that he displayed, his most precious gift from God was that of his priestly ministry. Thank you, Father Julian Tennyson Woods. You were indeed a genius. Points for discussion. As a small boy, Julian had a great interest in insects, rocks and plants. What is your special interest? What do you like to collect? Julian liked to talk to his dad about the specimens he collected. To whom do you like to chat? Who shares your interests? Julian had many gifts and talents. What are your gifts? Many of his gifts grew and developed over Julian's life, so he became a very respected geologist, paleontologist, zoologist, botanist, and scientist. What are these professions? What could your gifts and interests lead you to become when you grow up? Father Woods was considered by all he met as a very kind person. Who is a kind person you know? How do you show kindness to others? In present time, we would call Father Woods an eco-hero. Why would we call him that? What does Father Woods teach us about nature? How did nature bring Father Woods closer to God the Creator? Who co-founded the Sisters of St. Joseph, and what was their most important work in Australia? I hope you enjoyed this story.